Hi guys, welcome to chapter 15. We're going to cover the respiratory system today. The rest of the chapter will cover the circulatory system and the lymphatic system as well. But today, respiratory system. Okay, so the main function of the respiratory system is to bring oxygen in, and we do that by inhaling, and then to remove a waste product, which is carbon dioxide, and we do that by exhaling. So every time you inhale, bringing oxygen in. Every time you exhale, you're releasing carbon dioxide, okay? Our breathing rate increases with activity. You know this, okay? But it's more than just to bring in more oxygen. So the more you're moving, the more exercise you're doing, you're playing a soccer game or whatever, you need more oxygen for the functions, the chemical reactions in your body, namely cellular respiration. You need more oxygen, and so we have to take in more. But then we're also producing more carbon dioxide, and so it's just as important to be exhaling more to get rid of that, okay? So breathing is that in and out movement of the gas, okay? Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Respiration, for this chapter, we're going to refer to respiration as what's happening on the cellular level. So cellular respiration is that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide there, okay? The cellular respiration in the cells uses oxygen and it produces carbon dioxide as a waste product. If you go to the doctor, sometimes they'll take your pulse, they'll take your blood pressure, and sometimes they might count your respiration. So in the medical field, they will oftentimes mix respiration and breathing as the same thing. But to get a little more cellular and a little more scientific, we're going to keep breathing as the gas coming in and out of the system, and then respiration as the gas exchange on the cellular level. Okay. All right, another pathway for you. Pathway of air. Okay, so obviously the air is going to come in through either your mouth or your nose. Okay, you can inhale through your nose or your mouth. We're going to talk about mouth breathers on the next slide here. Okay, that air then joins in your pharynx. Okay, so your pharynx is kind of the back of your throat, kind of back behind your tongue. Your nose leads to that, and so does your mouth, okay? And so once it gets to the pharynx, the air is together. It doesn't matter where it came from. It goes through your voice box, which is known as your larynx. You don't need to know that as part of the pathway of air, okay? Because the larynx is really part of the trachea. So mouth and nose to pharynx to trachea. And trachea, you could feel your trachea. It's the main part of your airway, but it's protected by these rings of cartilage, and it's very rigid, and you can feel it. Don't squeeze too hard because it's really uncomfortable. Your body will protect that area, because if your airway collapses, if something lands on your throat, your neck, and compresses your airway, you can't breathe. And so that's why those rigid rings of cartilage are there, okay? So from the trachea, then the path of air branches into two separate sides for the two separate lungs, okay? And that first branch, that first split is called bronchi, and then those split into smaller branches called bronchioles, okay? Now at the end of, and it keeps kind of branching smaller and smaller bronchioles. At the end of those are these things called alveoli, and these are the functional units of a lung, and these are microscopic, and there's tons and tons of them. And this is actually where the gas exchange takes place. We're going to talk more about that gas exchange on a later slide, okay? One thing to keep in mind, though, is that lungs are not hollow, okay? These alveoli are microscopic, and they're kind of like tiny little microscopic balloons. So they're hollow, and they fill with air, but your lung itself is solid. This is the cross-section of a lung, okay? This is the front of the lung, and it would be stacked up. It would be higher like this. So this is like a slice of the lung, and you can see that it's solid. It's very lightweight. It's very spongy. You can see these little holes. You can kind of see light coming through those. That's some of the bronchioles, bronchioles, and those branches getting smaller and smaller. This spongy material is made up of a whole bunch of alveoli. Okay, so your lungs are not balloons. All right, so mouth breathers, any Stranger Thing fans out there? It is better to breathe through your nose than your mouth. Your nose actually serves a function, three functions actually. It moistens the air. Sometimes people get nosebleeds when there's very low humidity. because that dry air going into your body is kind of irritating. And so your nose is a very humid environment, and it helps to moisten the air. It also warms the air. If you've ever been out in the snow, you know that when you breathe really, really cold air, it's kind of uncomfortable. And so your nose attempts to warm the air as well. And it filters it a little bit. We do have some hairs in there, and that helps filter out some big stuff. But it also just kind of filters out dust and stuff. When you sneeze, sometimes that's just because your nose has filtered some dust or something out of it, and you sneeze to remove it. So your nose is very functional when it comes to prepping the air for the rest of your airway, okay? All right, so let's talk more about breathing. It is not a matter of your lungs just expanding and filling up, okay? In fact, your lungs don't really move the air on their own. Your chest muscles and your diaphragm do that, okay? Now the diaphragm, and you can see this down here, and you can kind of see it on this slide also. Let me move myself a little bit lower. There we go. This is a flat muscle that really, it goes from the front of the ribs to the back of the ribs, and it really separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, okay? If you get hiccups, it's a spasm of your diaphragm. Fun fact. Okay, so what happens when you inhale is the diaphragm moves down, okay? Now this creates a larger cavity of space, okay? So if the diaphragm moves down, there's more room for air in here. That creates a low pressure environment. A vacuum is like no pressure, okay? It's not quite a complete vacuum. Anyway, extra space, lower pressure. It means there's higher pressure out here. I'm just gonna put HP for higher pressure. You're gonna learn in 8th grade science that high pressure always pushes to low. And so the air actually gets pushed in when that diaphragm goes down. So your chest then does expand and your lungs do fill up, but it's not your lungs aren't sucking the air in, because science doesn't suck, okay? Science pushes. The air gets pushed in. Your ribs are separated by muscles too, and those muscles will kind of spread out. And so your ribs spread out and the diaphragm drops down. And so take a deep breath right now, and you can see that your chest expands, okay? But as you breathe, your chest expands first. And that's what allows the air that's what allows the air to come in. Your chest isn't expanding because of the air is coming in because your chest is expanding, okay? Now exhaling is much simpler. When you exhale, the diaphragm relaxes and pushes back up, and then your ribs kind of come back down, and so it really just squeezes the air out of the lungs and it goes out of your mouth, okay? This is a little model to show that, okay? So the balloon represents the lung, okay, in a chest cavity, and this little guy down here represents the diaphragm, okay? So this is open, but I'm not gonna blow air into it, okay? I'm going to pull down on the diaphragm, and look what happens to that little blue balloon. As I pull down on the diaphragm, I'm creating extra space in here. No air can get in through the bottle. The only way air can get in is through the lungs, through the balloon. And so the air is actually attempting to get into this space, okay? So as I pull down on it, make sure you're in front of the camera here, you can see that the balloon fills up a little bit, okay? I'm just pulling down on this, and the balloon expands a little, okay? That's exactly how your lungs work. Pretty crazy. Okay, so now let's talk about the gas exchange. We want the oxygen to get into our circulatory system and the carbon dioxide to go out, okay? So the circulatory system brings in oxygen, poor blood back to the lungs. And we'll learn about that in the next section. The pulmonary pulmonary artery brings oxygen, poor blood to the alveoli, okay? And it branches down these little tiny capillaries. This blue represents oxygen poor. They don't actually turn blue, okay? So what happens in this capillary is you have a really, really, really high concentration of carbon dioxide, okay? So there's a whole bunch of CO2 in this capillary, okay? When you inhale, you bring in oxygen. And so inside this alveoli, you have a whole bunch of oxygen. You have a really high concentration of oxygen, okay? And then the capillary just, it goes all the way around the alveoli. Okay, so when it comes in, it's very oxygen poor. By the time it leaves, it's nice and oxygen rich. Okay, oops, that's supposed to say rich. This happens by diffusion. I don't know if you remember diffusion from like the first chapter of the year. Diffusion is something moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay, so since there's a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood and a lower concentration of carbon dioxide in the alveoli, the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli. Okay, the same is true for the oxygen. There's a higher concentration of oxygen in the alveoli and a much lower concentration in the capillaries, and so it moves in to the blood. Okay, and so now these nice bright red blood cells are oxygen rich, and that's going to go back to the heart to be pumped to the rest of the body. Okay, that's it. Respiratory system, amazing. Bye bye.